If you thought royal history was all powdered wigs and polite curtsies, think again. Beneath the silk sheets of Versailles and behind the velvet drapes of diplomacy, French queens were busy rewriting the rules of romance, one scandalous secret at a time. This is not your average history lesson. It's a slow-burning candle of courtly crushes, forbidden flirtations, and love letters hidden in pastry boxes. It's the kind of story that makes you giggle, gasp, and then yawn yourself into a blissful slumber. So, fluff your pillow, sip your chamomile, and prepare for a royal tale that's more ooh la la than snooze fest. And hey, while you're getting comfy, don't forget to like and subscribe, because even queens appreciate a loyal audience. Drop a comment below too, telling me from which cozy corner of the world you're sneaking a peek at these secrets. Whether it's a castle in France, a tea room in London, or your bed in pajamas, I want to know where you're tuning in from. Royal robes optional. Because really, what's better than scandalous history and a global audience dozing off together? Once upon a powdered time, in a palace so extravagant it made chandeliers blush, lived a queen who was famously misquoted about cake. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian-born bride of Louis XV, had everything: diamonds, dresses, and drama. But what she didn't have, at least not officially, was a love story worthy of a Netflix adaptation. Enter Count Axel von Fersen, a Swedish nobleman with cheekbones sharp enough to slice through royal protocol and a wardrobe that screamed, "I duel before breakfast." He was charming, mysterious, and fluent in the language of longing glances across crowded ballrooms. Their first meeting? A masquerade ball, naturally, because nothing says potential affair like hiding your identity behind feathers and flirting in candlelight. Fersen was smitten, Marie was intrigued, and history was about to get a juicy subplot. They exchanged letters, coded, of course, because nothing ruins a royal romance like nosy courtiers. Historians still debate whether their relationship was consummated or just emotionally intense. But let's be honest, if your pen pal helps you escape a revolution, you're probably more than just friends. Yes, Fersen helped plan the royal family's ill-fated escape from Paris in 1791. He arranged the carriage, the disguises, and probably packed snacks. The plan failed spectacularly, but the gesture? Très romantic. Marie O.S. letters to Fersen were filled with phrases like, "I love you madly, and you alone can make me happy," which, in Queenspeak, is basically, "I'd trade my tiara for a cuddle." Their love story ended not with a kiss, but with a guillotine. Marie was executed in 1793, and Fersen mourned her for the rest of his life. He never married, never forgot, and probably never stopped wondering what might have been. In the 17th century, France was ruled by a queen who knew how to wear a crown and keep a secret. Anne of Austria wasn't just the mother of Louis XIV, the Sun King. She was also the rumored heartthrob of one of the most powerful men in Europe, Cardinal Jules Mazarin. Now, you might be thinking, a cardinal? Isn't that like dating your priest? And yes, technically, Mazarin was supposed to be celibate. But history has a way of turning vows into vague suggestions, especially when love letters start flying faster than royal decrees. Anne and Mazarin were a political power duo. He was her advisor, her confidant, and possibly her cuddle buddy. Their relationship was so close that courtiers whispered, scribbled, and gossiped like it was their full-time job. Mazarin even moved into the Louvre, because nothing says, We're just friends, like sharing a palace. Did they marry in secret? Some historians say yes. Others say, meh, probably not. But Anne did give Mazarin gifts, defend him against enemies, and let him run France like a boss. If that's not love, it's at least a very intense HR violation. Mazarin, for his part, wrote letters that were suspiciously romantic. He called Anne my soul, my queen, and the reason I wake up in the morning, which is either poetic or a cry for help. He also gave her diamonds, which is historically the universal symbol for I like you more than I should. Their love story was never officially confirmed, but it lingered like expensive perfume in Versailles, and when Mazarin died, Anne mourned him deeply. She wore black, cried in public, and probably whispered sweet nothings to his portrait. Catherine de' Medici wasn't your average queen. She was Italian, fiercely intelligent, and had a hobby that most monarchs avoided, dabbling in the dark arts. While other queens were busy embroidering cushions, Catherine was busy brewing potions, reading horoscopes, and possibly whispering sweet nothings to her personal alchemist. Yes, an alchemist, because when you're Queen of France and married to a guy who prefers jousting to romance, you find companionship in someone who knows how to turn lead into love, or at least into something that makes your enemies sneeze uncontrollably. His name? Nostradamus. Okay, not that Nostradamus, though she did consult him too. This was a lesser-known potion master who hung around Catherine's court like a medieval mixologist. He wore robes, muttered Latin, and had a beard that screamed, I know things you don't. Their relationship was complicated. He wasn't a lover in the traditional sense, more like a magical therapist with benefits. Catherine trusted him with her deepest fears, her darkest plots, and possibly her favorite recipes for seduction. He brewed elixirs for fertility, loyalty, and maybe a little flirtation, because nothing says, I adore you like a vial of something that smells like regret and rosemary. Rumors swirled. Courtiers whispered that Catherine used love potions to keep her husband faithful. Spoiler, it didn't work. And that she gifted her alchemist with jewels, secrets, and the occasional royal wink. Whether they were romantically involved or just emotionally entangled in a cloud of incense and intrigue, one thing's for sure, Catherine loved her magic man. She even built a private laboratory in the Louvre, which is basically the Renaissance version of I made you a man cave. And when her enemies started mysteriously falling ill, people began to wonder if her alchemist was mixing more than just perfumes. Eventually, the alchemist disappeared, either into exile, into legend, or into a puff of suspicious smoke. Catherine mourned him quietly, probably while stirring something ominous in a golden cauldron. Louise, Elizabeth d'Orléans, was born into French royalty, which meant she was destined for a life of powdered wigs, arranged marriages, and awkward dinners with people she didn't choose. At the tender age of 12, yes, 12, she was shipped off to Spain to marry Louis I, heir to the Spanish throne. Because nothing says romantic honeymoon like a diplomatic trade agreement. Now, Louise Elizabeth wasn't exactly thrilled. She didn't speak Spanish. She missed her pet parrot, and her new husband was more interested in playing cards than playing Prince Charming. So, what did she do? She found comfort in the one thing that transcends borders: scandal. Enter the Spanish sigh, a nickname given by gossipy courtiers to a young nobleman who lingered a little too long in Louis S. chambers and bowed a little too deeply at court. He was charming, musically inclined, and had the kind of mustache that made fans flutter. Their connection was subtle, whispered, and possibly choreographed to the rhythm of flamenco. Louise Elizabeth, bored of royal protocol and allergic to boredom, began hosting late-night salons filled with poetry, music, and suspiciously long glances. The Spanish sigh was always there, playing guitar, reciting verses, and occasionally helping her practice Spanish in ways that made the palace guards raise an eyebrow. Their affair was never confirmed, but the rumors were so spicy they could have seasoned a paella. Louise's behavior became erratic. She wore men's clothing, danced in fountains, and once allegedly tried to ride a donkey through the palace. Historians call it eccentric. I call it peak breakup energy. Louise Nuppy died young, and Louise Elizabeth was sent back to France like a scandalous souvenir. She never remarried, never forgot Spain, and possibly never stopped sighing over her sigh. Queen Hortense de Beauharnais wasn't T-born into royalty. She was launched into it like a cannonball of charm and chaos. Daughter of Josephine, yes, that Josephine, and stepdaughter to Napoleon Bonaparte, Hortense had the kind of family tree that needed pruning with a sword. She was smart, musical, and had a talent for turning awkward political dinners into impromptu poetry readings. Her marriage to Louis Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, was about as romantic as a tax audit. So, naturally, she found comfort in the arms of someone who actually knew how to rhyme. Enter General Charles de Flahaut, a dashing officer with a flair for verse and a jawline that could cut through diplomatic tension. He was charming, witty, and had a habit of quoting Rousseau in the rain. Hortense was smitten and possibly damp. Their affair began with shared poems and secret strolls through palace gardens. One particularly stormy evening, they were caught in a downpour while reciting lines from Les Miserables, which hadn't been written yet, but let's pretend. Instead of running for cover, they danced in puddles, kissed under lightning, and invented the romantic cliché. Before it was cool, courtiers whispered, they always do. Why does the queen hum love songs after military briefings? Why does she keep requesting rain-themed piano pieces? Why is the general's uniform always mysteriously soggy? All valid questions, none officially answered. Their love was passionate, but doomed. Politics, war, and Napoleon's disapproval loomed like thunderclouds. Hortense gave birth to a son, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who would later become Emperor Napoleon III. Historians still debate whether Flahaut was the father. Hortense never confirmed, and Flahaut never denied, which, in royal terms, is basically a confession written in cursive. Despite the drama, their romance remained a quiet storm, brief, beautiful, and soaked in poetry. Hortense continued writing music and verses long after the affair ended, and Flahaut went on to charm other salons with his soggy charisma. Eugénie de Montijo was the last empress of France, and she had a flair for drama that made opera singers look underdressed. Married to Napoleon III, she was elegant, intelligent, and absolutely obsessed with romanticism, the 19th century movement that made everything feel like a tragic love letter written in candlelight. She adored poetry, especially the kind that involved doomed lovers, stormy cliffs, and declarations of passion shouted into the void. Her favorite poet, Lord Byron, Yes, that Byron, the British bad boy who wore tight pants, wrote scandalous verses, and died decades before Eugenie ever picked up a quill. But minor details like he's dead didn't stop Eugenie. She reportedly held seances in her palace, hoping to contact Byron's spirit. Because when you're Empress of France and bored of court gossip, you summon literary ghosts for romantic advice. Her spiritual advisor, a man with a beard that looked like it had its own opinions, claimed Byron S. Ghost was very chatty and fond of Eugenie S. handwriting, which is either poetic or deeply concerning. During one seance, the table allegedly levitated while Byron's spirit dictated a poem about longing, lace, and lemon tarts. Historians are still trying to decode it. Eugenie kept a diary filled with verses she claimed were inspired by Byron's energy. She even wrote a play based on one of his poems, starring herself as the tragic heroine. It was performed once, then banned by her husband, who preferred military parades to metaphysical melodrama. Was she truly in love with Byron's ghost? Maybe. Or maybe she just needed a break from politics, corsets, and Napoleon's mustache. Either way, her devotion to dead poets became legendary and slightly spooky. After Napoleon III's fall, Eugenie lived in exile, surrounded by books, candles, and the occasional psychic. She never remarried, never stopped writing, and possibly never stopped waiting for Byron to send her a ghostly bouquet. Marie Leszczyńska wasn't the flashiest queen in French history. She didn't throw wild parties, wear scandalous gowns, or start revolutions with her hairstyle. No, Marie was quiet, devout, and deeply fond of music. The kind of queen who'd rather hum a hymn than headline a gossip column. She was married to Louis XV, a king who had more mistresses than monogamy molecules. While Louis was busy gallivanting through Versailles like a hormonal hummingbird, Marie found solace in her music room and in the company of her court composer. His name was Colin de Blamont, a man whose powdered wig was only outshined by his talent for writing symphonies that made hearts flutter and knees wobble. He was gentle, brilliant, and had the kind of voice that made violins jealous. Marie and Colin spent long afternoons together, composing, rehearsing, and occasionally exchanging glances that lingered longer than a cello solo. He taught her to play the harpsichord. She taught him how to blush like a duchess. Their connection was melodic, subtle, and possibly romantic, like a duet that never quite admitted it was a love song. Courtiers whispered, "Of course, they always do." Why does the queen smile more when Colin enters? Why does she request encore performances in private chambers? Why does her sheet music have lipstick smudges? All valid questions, none officially answered. Marie never confirmed the affair, and Colin never bragged, but their bond was undeniable. When he composed a piece called L'amour silencieux, silent love, people raised eyebrows so high they needed royal permission to lower them. Their relationship was a symphony of restraint. No scandals, no drama, just quiet affection wrapped in musical notes and mutual respect. And when Colin left court, Marie reportedly kept his compositions close, like love letters written in treble clef. Marguerite de Valois, also known as Queen Margot, was the kind of woman who made history blush. Born in the 16th century to the powerful Valois dynasty, she was smart, stylish, and scandalously fluent in the language of love and literature. While other queens were busy embroidering tapestries of boredom, Marguerite was penning verses that made courtiers swoon and poets propose. She didn't just read poetry, she lived it, and occasionally, she dated it. Her marriage to Henry of Navarre, later Henry IV of France, was more political chess than romantic checkmate. They were mismatched from the start. He liked hunting and war. She liked sonnets and silk. So Marguerite did what any self-respecting Renaissance queen would do. She found companionship in the arms of men who rhymed. Her lovers were poets, philosophers, and the occasional noble with a flair for metaphors. One suitor, reportedly, wrote her a poem so beautiful she kissed him before he finished the last stanza. That's either romantic or a very aggressive form of literary critique. Marguerite's court became a salon of scandal and syllables. She hosted readings, flirted with authors, and once allegedly edited a love letter with red ink and lipstick. Her bedroom was rumored to have more books than pillows, and possibly more poets than pages. She even wrote her own memoirs, which were so juicy they were banned for centuries. In them, she described her affairs with the kind of detail that made historians clutch their pearls and reach for their smelling salts. Marguerite didn't just spill tea, she poured it, steeped it, and served it with scandalous biscuits. Despite the drama, Marguerite was respected for her intellect and wit. She navigated wars, betrayals, and heartbreak with the grace of a woman who knew how to rhyme treason with season. And when she died, she left behind a legacy of literature, love, and eyebrow-raising anecdotes. Isabella of Hainaut was married to Philip II of France in the 12th century, a time when romance was less about roses and more about surviving arranged marriages without accidentally starting a war. She was young, beautiful, and fluent in the art of looking regal while secretly daydreaming about someone who wasn't. Her husband. Enter Sir Etienne, a knight with a quill in one hand and a sword in the other. He was brave, poetic, and had the kind of jawline that made troubadours write ballads in falsetto. Isabella met him during a tournament where he won third place in jousting, but first place in her heart. Their connection was forged in stolen glances and verses passed under goblets. Etienne wrote sonnets so romantic they made monks blush. He sealed them with wax, molded from his sword hilt, because nothing says, "I love you" like weaponized stationery. Isabella, trapped in a marriage colder than a castle corridor, found warmth in Etienne's words. She hid his letters in her prayer book, read them by candlelight, and once, allegedly, embroidered one into her sleeve. That's either devotion or medieval Pinterest. Their affair was never physical, at least not officially, but their emotional intimacy was legendary. Etienne once wrote, "Your eyes are my crusade," which historians agree is either deeply romantic or slightly terrifying. Philip II eventually found out. He was not amused. Etienne was reassigned to a distant outpost where the only romance involved sheep and regret. Isabella mourned quietly, wearing a brooch shaped like a quill, and refusing to attend tournaments ever again. She died young, but her story lingered in the halls of history like perfume on parchment. Etienne's sonnets were found centuries later, tucked inside a hollowed-out chess piece. They were published under the title Verses for a Queen Who Smiled, and yes, they still make romantics swoon. Joan of Navarre was no ordinary queen. She ruled in the 14th century, a time when women were expected to smile politely, pray frequently, and never question the meaning of existence. Joan, however, had other plans, plans that involved philosophy, power, and possibly a few candlelit arguments that ended in romantic footnotes. She was married to Philip IV of France, a man known for his stern face and even sterner policies. While Philip was busy taxing the Knights Templar and inventing new ways to frown, Joan was hosting salons filled with scholars, theologians, and one particular philosopher who made her heart skip like a medieval record. His name was Etienne de la Pensée. Not his real name, but let's pretend. He was brilliant, brooding, and had the kind of voice that made Latin sound like a love song. He debated theology with Joan in private chambers, where the candlelight flickered and the boundaries between logic and longing blurred like ink on parchment. Their conversations were legendary. "Does free will exist?" he'd ask. "Only if I choose to love you," she'd reply. "Is the soul immortal?" "Yours is, especially when you recite poetry." Courtiers rolled their eyes so hard they needed neck braces. Etienne gifted Joan with scrolls filled with philosophical musings and possibly coded love notes. She responded with annotations in the margins, some scholarly, some suspiciously flirty. One scroll contained a footnote that read, "Your argument is flawed, but your cheekbones are divine." Historians still debate whether that was metaphorical or marital. Philip IV eventually caught wind of the philosopher's frequent visits. Etienne was reassigned to a monastery, where the only debates involved soup recipes and Gregorian chants. Joan mourned quietly, wearing a pendant shaped like a question mark, and refusing to attend theological conferences ever again. She died young, but her legacy lingered in dusty libraries and whispered legends. Etienne's writings were later discovered in a hidden drawer, alongside a pressed flower and a note that read, "To the queen who made me believe in love and logic." Queen Anne of Brittany was a woman of many titles and even more responsibilities. She was married to 2 French kings. Not at the same time, this isn't a soap opera. And she spent most of her reign negotiating treaties, managing land, and trying not to roll her eyes at royal drama. But beneath the crown and the contracts was a queen who loved to laugh, and in the glittering halls of her court, one man made her laugh louder than anyone else. The jester. His name was Triboulet, a man whose wit was sharper than a sword, and whose wardrobe looked like a rainbow exploded on a chessboard. He juggled, joked, and once allegedly insulted a duke so cleverly that the duke applauded before realizing he'd been roasted. Anne adored him, not just for his humor, but for his honesty. In a world of flattery and formality, Triboulet was refreshingly real. He teased her about her crown, her court, and once her choice in shoes. She laughed so hard she spilled wine on a bishop. It was a good day. Their relationship was playful, possibly flirtatious, and definitely eyebrow-raising. Triboulet wrote her poems disguised as riddles, and Anne responded with gifts disguised as accidental wardrobe upgrades. He once received a velvet doublet embroidered with tiny crowns. Subtle? Not really. Courtiers whispered. They always do. Why does the queen request private performances? Why does the jester's hat match her gown? Why did she giggle for 7 minutes straight during a tax briefing? All valid questions. None officially answered. Anne never confirmed the affair, and Triboulet never bragged. But their bond was undeniable. When Anne was ill, Triboulet performed outside her window every morning. juggling apples and reciting limericks about love and laundry. She recovered. Coincidence? Maybe. Magic? Definitely. When Anne died, Triboulet reportedly wept into his bells and refused to perform for weeks. He later wrote a poem titled The Queen Who Laughed at My Heart, which historians agree is either deeply romantic or just really confusing. Queen Marie-Thérèse of Austria was married to Louis XIV, the Sun King, a man so dazzling he practically wore solar flares as cufflinks. But while Louis was busy dazzling courtiers and collecting mistresses like decorative napkins, Marie-Thérèse lived in the quieter corners of Versailles, where the sun didn't always shine. She was devout, reserved, and often overlooked in the glittering chaos of court life. But every evening, just as the palace began to yawn and the fountains whispered their sleepy lullabies, Marie-Thérèse would take a walk in the royal gardens, and she was never alone. Enter the Shadow, a nickname whispered by servants for a man who always appeared at dusk, dressed in dark velvet, with eyes like candlelight and a voice that could make Latin sound like lullabies. He wasn't a noble, nor a knight, nor a poet. He was the royal gardener's assistant, which, in Versailles terms, was basically invisible, but not to Marie-Thérèse. They walked together among the hedges, speaking softly about flowers, faith, and the stars. He taught her the names of rare blooms. She taught him the names of saints. Their conversations were gentle, unrecorded, and possibly romantic, like a sonnet written in soil. Courtiers noticed. They always do. Why does the queen linger near the lavender? Why does the gardener's assistant smell like her perfume? Why did she name a rose after a man who doesn't exist in the registry? All valid questions, none officially answered. Their bond was never scandalous, just quietly tender. He once left a bouquet of moonflowers on her windowsill, with a note that read, "For the queen who blooms in silence." She replied with a pressed violet and a prayer card. Historians still debate whether that counts as flirting or floristry. When he was reassigned to a distant estate, Marie-Thérèse reportedly stopped walking in the gardens. She spent her evenings in the chapel, lighting candles and whispering to the shadows. When she died, a single moonflower was found tucked inside her Bible. Queen Blanche of Castile was no damsel in distress. She was the mother of Louis IX, later Saint Louis, and she ruled France with the kind of iron will that made knights tremble and bishops rethink their sermons. But beneath her regal resolve was a heart that once fluttered for a man who wore chainmail like cologne. His name was Sir Roland de Clermont, a crusader with a reputation for bravery, brooding, and writing love notes on the back of battle maps. He first met Blanche during a royal inspection of troops, where he bowed so deeply his helmet fell off. She laughed. He blushed. History took notes. Roland wasn't just a warrior. He was a whisperer. He sent Blanche letters from the battlefield, filled with poetic reflections on honor, longing, and the smell of her perfume, which he claimed lingered in his tent, despite being 800 miles away. She replied with prayers, pressed flowers, and once, a ribbon that allegedly survived 3 sieges and 1 awkward dinner with a sultan. Their relationship was never public. Blanche was a queen, a regent, and a woman constantly surrounded by advisors who thought romance was a distraction from tax reform. But in the quiet hours of the night, she read Roland S. words and imagined a world where love didn't require a royal decree. Roland returned from the Crusades with a limp, a scar shaped like a fleur-de-lis, and a heart still devoted to Blanche. They met once more in a garden, under moonlight, where he recited a poem about roses, redemption, and royal restraint. She kissed his hand, gave him a book of psalms, and whispered, "You were my crusade." He left court soon after, choosing exile over scandal. Blanche ruled with grace, raised a saint, and kept Roland's letters hidden in a hollowed-out Bible. When she died, they were found by a monk, who read them aloud and wept into his beard. Queen Adelaide of Savoy was the kind of royal who preferred quiet elegance over loud declarations. Married to Louis XV's grandfather, she lived in a time when portraits were the Instagram of the aristocracy, except they took 6 months to post and involved a lot more velvet. Adelaide was graceful, reserved, and famously photogenic, if you count oil paintings as photos. Her official portraitist was a man named Claude Vernet, a painter with hands that knew how to capture light, emotion, and possibly the Queen's cheekbones a little too lovingly. He was talented, intense, and had the kind of gaze that made paint blush. When he painted Adelaide, he lingered over her eyes, her hands, and once allegedly spent 3 days perfecting the curve of her smile. That's either artistic dedication or romantic obsession with a palette. Their sessions were long, private, and filled with quiet conversation. He asked about her childhood. She asked about his favorite pigments. He once said, "You are the color I've been searching for," which is either poetic or a cry for help from someone who has inhaled too much linseed oil. Courtiers whispered. They always do. Why does the Queen's portrait look more dreamy than regal? Why does the painter keep requesting extra sittings? Why did she gift him a silk handkerchief embroidered with tiny easels? All valid questions. None officially answered. Adelaide never confirmed the affair, and Vernet never painted another woman with quite the same tenderness. One of his sketches, found years later, was labeled La Reine dans la Lumière, the Queen in the Light. It showed her not as a monarch, but as a muse, bathed in soft gold and quiet longing. When Adelaide passed away, Vernet reportedly stopped painting for a year. He returned with a new style, darker, moodier, and missing the warmth that once glowed from his royal canvases. Queen Henrietta Maria of France became the wife of England, King Charles IV, a man who loved divine right, disliked Parliament, and had the unfortunate habit of losing his head, literally. But before the political drama unfolded, Henrietta Maria was known for her love of actual drama, the kind performed on stage, with costumes, candles, and actors who cried on cue. She adored theater, not just watching it, but starring in it. She performed in masks, elaborate court plays, filled with music, myth, and enough symbolism to make Shakespeare say, "Okay, tone it down." And in one of those productions, she met a man who made her heart skip like a poorly rehearsed soliloquy. His name was Thomas Carew, a poet, playwright, and courtier, with a quill dipped in charm and a smile that could melt even the frostiest royal protocol. He wrote verses for her, tailored roles to her strengths, and once allegedly whispered, "You are the muse I never deserved," during a rehearsal break. That's either romantic or dangerously close to a stage direction. Henrietta Maria was enchanted. Carew's plays were witty, romantic, and suspiciously full of queens who looked a lot like her. Their rehearsals stretched late into the night, filled with laughter, longing, and the occasional dramatic pause that lasted longer than necessary. Courtiers whispered, "They always do. Why does the Queen request private readings? Why does the playwright's ink smell like her perfume? Why did she cry during a scene where the Queen loses her lover to war, even though it was a comedy?" All valid questions, none officially answered. Their relationship was never confirmed, but the emotional intimacy was undeniable. Carew once wrote a poem titled Celestial Mistress, which historians believe was inspired by Henrietta Maria's performance in a mask where she played Venus and accidentally tripped over a cloud prop. When political tensions rose and Charles III's reign began unraveling like a poorly stitched costume, Henrietta Maria fled to France. Carew stayed behind, his plays fading into obscurity, his muse gone. He died shortly after, and one of his final manuscripts contained a dedication to the Queen who made tragedy beautiful. Queen Louise of Lorraine was married to Henry III of France, a king who wore pearls in his beard and hosted masquerade balls that made Versailles look like a quiet picnic. But Louise, she was the opposite, quiet, devout, and more interested in prayer than pageantry. While Henry danced through court life like a glittery tornado, Louise retreated into the calm embrace of religion. She spent hours in chapels, days in silence, and nights writing letters to saints. But even queens, who seek solitude, sometimes find unexpected companionship, in this case, in the form of a monk named Brother Armand. Armand wasn't your average monk. He had a voice like velvet, eyes that held centuries of wisdom, and a talent for listening that made Louise feel heard in ways no royal ever had. Their conversations began with theology and slowly drifted into philosophy, poetry, and the occasional dangerously tender silence. He taught her Latin prayers. She taught him how to smile without guilt. He once said, "Your soul is louder than any sermon," which is either deeply spiritual or the medieval version of flirting. Louise blushed. The candles flickered. History took notes. Courtiers didn't whisper because they didn't know. Their meetings were private, cloaked in incense and quiet reverence. But Louise's letters to Armand, discovered centuries later in a hollowed-out hymnal, revealed a bond that went beyond confession. "You are my peace," she wrote, "and my storm." Armand never broke his vows, and Louise never broke her silence. But their connection was undeniable. When Henry III was assassinated, Louise entered mourning so deep she wore black for the rest of her life. Armand visited her once more, bringing a single white lily and a psalm written in his own hand. She died in solitude, surrounded by candles and quiet. Her final request, to be buried with a small scroll, Armand's prayer, folded into the shape of a heart. Queen Anne of France, daughter of Louis XIV and wife to Charles VIII, was a woman of quiet strength and sharp observation. She ruled Brittany before she ruled hearts, and while her marriage was more treaty than tenderness, Anne found her freedom in the skies, or more precisely, in the talons of falcons. Falconry was the royal pastime of choice, elegant, dangerous, and full of metaphors about control and release. Anne took to it with surprising skill, and her falconer, a man named Lucien de Vautour, took to her with surprising admiration. Lucien was no ordinary bird wrangler. He had eyes like storm clouds, hands that moved like poetry, and a voice that could calm even the crankiest hawk. He taught Anne how to wear the glove, how to whistle for her bird, and how to read the wind like a love letter. Their lessons grew longer, their silences grew softer. Anne began requesting private falconry sessions at dawn, when the mist still clung to the hedges and the court was too sleepy to gossip. Lucien brought her rare birds, rare stories, and once a feather tucked into a folded note that read, "Even wings need rest." Courtiers whispered, "They always do." Why does the queen smile more after falconry? Why does the falconer's tunic smell like her perfume? Why did she name her favorite bird Lucian? All valid questions. None officially answered. Their bond was never scandalous, just quietly wild. Lucien once released a falcon with a ribbon tied to its leg. It circled Anne 3 times before flying off into the sunrise. She watched it go, hand on heart, whispering something no one heard. When Lucien was reassigned to a distant estate, because apparently falcons aren't the only things that get sent away, Anne kept falconry close. She trained alone, wrote in her journal, and wore a pendant shaped like a feather. When she died, her favorite glove was found beside her bed, worn, soft, and embroidered with a tiny bird in flight. Queen Marie Amélie of Naples and Sicily became the consort of King Louis-Philippe I of France, a monarch who preferred modesty over monarchy and ruled with the vibe of a well-dressed librarian. Marie Amélie matched his quiet dignity, but beneath her composed exterior was a heart that bloomed for beauty, especially the kind that grew in soil. She adored gardens, not just strolling through them, but knowing their secrets, the Latin names, the seasonal moods, the way a tulip could look smug if planted too close to a peony. Her personal garden at the Château de Neuilly was her sanctuary, and in that sanctuary worked a man named Julien Lavande. Julien was the royal botanist. He had dirt under his nails, poetry in his soul, and a talent for making flowers grow in places they weren't supposed to. He spoke to plants like they were old friends, and to queens like they were equals. Marie Amélie was intrigued, and possibly enchanted. Their connection began with a shared love of orchids. Julien showed her how to coax a bloom from a stubborn stem. She showed him how to smile without permission. He once said, "You are the rarest flower in this garden," which is either romantic or a sign he needed more sleep. She began requesting private garden tours, early morning walks among dew-kissed petals, and whispered Latin. Julien gifted her a rose he bred himself, pale pink, with a scent like memory. She named it Amélie's Whisper and insisted it be planted near her favorite bench. Courtiers whispered, "They always do." Why does the queen spend so much time in the greenhouse? Why does the botanist's apron have embroidery? Why did she write a poem titled "The Man Who Waters My Soul"? All valid questions, none officially answered. Their relationship was never scandalous, just quietly blooming. When Julien was sent to oversee a royal vineyard, Marie Amélie sent him letters, pressed with petals and signed with a flourish. He replied with sketches of vines and verses about longing. When she died, her garden was kept untouched for a year. The Amélie's Whisper rose continued to bloom, even in winter. Julien returned once, placed a single blossom on her grave, and whispered, "You were always in season." Queen Charlotte of Savoy was married to Louis XVII of France, a king known for his paranoia, his political cunning, and his ability to look suspicious even while eating soup. Charlotte, on the other hand, was gentle, artistic, and had a deep appreciation for beauty, especially the kind carved into stone. When Louis commissioned a new wing of the royal palace, Charlotte took a keen interest in the design. She didn't just want walls, she wanted wonder, and the architect assigned to the project, Etienne de Marbre, was more than happy to oblige. Etienne was tall, thoughtful, and had the kind of hands that made columns blush. He spoke in metaphors, sketched in silence, and once described a staircase as a poem you ascend. Charlotte was intrigued, and possibly enchanted. Their collaboration began with blueprints and blossomed into something more. She requested arches that felt like a hug, windows that invited dreams, and a garden path that whispered secrets. Etienne delivered, and added a few flourishes that weren't in the original plans, like a heart-shaped fountain and a hidden alcove with acoustics perfect for whispered poetry. Courtiers whispered, "They always do." Why does the queen visit the construction site daily? Why does the architect's tunic have paint smudges in royal purple? Why did she name the new wing La Galerie du Soupir, the Gallery of Sighs? All valid questions, none officially answered. Their bond was never scandalous, just quietly structural. Etienne once carved a rose into a column and claimed it was just decorative. Charlotte traced it with her fingers every morning. When the wing was completed, she hosted a private tour for Etienne alone, ending in the alcove, where she recited a poem about stone, silence, and stolen glances. He was later reassigned to a distant cathedral project. Charlotte sent him letters sealed with wax shaped like miniature arches. He replied with sketches of spires and verses about longing. When she died, her favorite room in the palace was found to contain a hidden inscription, Pour l'homme qui bâtit mon cœur. For the man who built my heart, Queen Yolande of Aragon was no stranger to power. She was the mother-in-law of Charles VII of France, a political powerhouse, and a woman who could outmaneuver half the court before breakfast. But beneath her crown of cunning was a mind that adored games, especially chess. She played daily, often alone, until one day a new tutor arrived at court, Master Luc de Noir, a chess prodigy with fingers like whispers and a gaze that could read your next move before you made it. He was quiet, brilliant, and had the kind of smirk that made bishops nervous. Their first match lasted 6 hours. Yolande lost, but only because she was distracted by the way Luc said, "Check." She demanded a rematch, then another, then daily sessions that stretched into candlelit evenings filled with strategy, silence, and the occasional flirtatious fork. Luc taught her openings, endgames, and how to sacrifice a rook for romance. She taught him how to bluff with a queen and how to win with grace. Their games became legendary, not for the moves, but for the tension. Courtiers watched from behind curtains, whispering, "Why does the queen blush when he castles? Why did she name her horse Pawn? Why is the chessboard always set before dawn?" All valid questions, none officially answered. Their relationship was never declared, but it was played out in 64 squares. Luc once carved a chess set from ivory and gifted it to Yolande, with each piece shaped like a moment they shared. The queen kept it in her private chamber, and rumor has it she spoke to the night piece when she missed him. When Luc was sent to tutor a foreign prince, Yolande wrote him a letter disguised as a chess puzzle. He solved it, replied with a poem hidden in a pawn's base, and they continued their correspondence in cryptic moves and metaphorical checkmates. She ruled wisely, loved quietly, and played fiercely. So, if you're lying in bed, wondering whether queens ever fell for chess masters, the answer is absolutely. And they probably invented romantic gambits while doing it. And there you have it, 20 tales of powdered passion, whispered rendezvous, and royal romance tucked between the folds of history, from poets to painters, falconers to philosophers. These queens loved boldly, secretly, and sometimes scandalously. But now, dear reader, the candles have burned low, the court has gone quiet, and the powdered wigs have been gently placed on their velvet pillows. The queens have kissed their lovers good night, some in dreams, some in memory, and so shall you. Thank you for staying with me through this sleepy saga. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Are you reading this from a throne, a teacup, or a blanket fort shaped like a chessboard? Now close your eyes, tuck in your thoughts, and let history hum you to sleep. Good night, Your Majesty.